The Dallas Cowboys might be about to make some moves that completely change the direction of this franchise, and I need to break down exactly who could be on the trading block because some of these names are going to shock you. And before we get into all of this, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now because we cover every single Cowboys update the moment it drops, and trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming next for this team. All right, so let me set the stage here because this offseason is unlike anything we have seen in recent Cowboys history. And the reason I say that is because when you undergo a full regime change on one side of the ball, everything gets thrown into chaos. And right now, the Dallas Cowboys defense is getting a complete overhaul from top to bottom, with almost the entire defensive coaching staff being replaced. And the only coach they have retained so far is Darian Thompson, the nickel and quarterback coach. So when you see that level of turnover on the coaching side, you better believe that player turnover is coming right behind it. Now, here is where things get interesting because I came across one of the most absurd trade proposals I have ever seen published by a major sports outlet, and I genuinely could not believe what I was reading because it was so bad that it almost felt like it was designed to sabotage the Cowboys rather than help them. One report from a national outlet suggested that Dallas should trade Kenny Clark to the Bengals along with a 2027 7th-round pick, and in return, the Cowboys would receive a 2027 6th-round pick. And I need you to understand how absolutely insane that proposal is because we are talking about giving away a dominant defensive tackle for essentially nothing in return. The reasoning behind this terrible idea was that it would save the Cowboys roughly $21.5 million against the salary cap. But here is what nobody seems to understand about the actual situation in Dallas right now. The front office has already communicated through multiple interviews that they want to extend Kenny Clark, not trade him away for pennies on the dollar. The Cowboys brass has made it crystal clear that their priorities include extending both Quinnen Williams and Kenny Clark, while also working to bring back Jordan Lewis and pursuing George Pickens. So that is 5 major moves that Dallas has already telegraphed to the entire league, and trading Kenny Clark directly contradicts everything they have said they want to do. But here is what we actually need to be talking about, because while these ridiculous trade proposals are floating around out there, the Cowboys do have some legitimate decisions to make about players who could realistically be moved, and the crazy part is some of these moves actually make a ton of sense when you look at where this roster is headed. Let me explain why this matters so much right now, because Dallas is in a very unique position when it comes to the draft, and this is something that not enough people are discussing, because after the Cowboys make their 2 first-round selections, they do not pick again until somewhere around pick 114 in the 4th round. So you are looking at a massive gap where you go from picking at 20 to not picking again for almost 100 selections, and that puts enormous pressure on the front office to have a perfect free agency period unless they find ways to acquire more draft capital. So how do you solve that problem when you are sitting there with limited assets and a roster that needs to be reshaped to fit a new defensive scheme? And the answer is you start looking at every single piece on your roster and asking yourself, can this player be used more efficiently somewhere else? And can we get something valuable in return? The first place I would look is at the restricted free agents, because Dallas has 4 of them coming up, and while one of those guys is absolutely someone you want to keep around, there are 3 others who could potentially net you draft pick compensation if you play your cards right. Let me break down how restricted free agency works for those who might not know, because understanding this is crucial to seeing what the Cowboys could be planning here. So a restricted free agent is a player with 3 accrued seasons and an expired contract who can negotiate with other teams, but their original team has the right of first refusal or can receive draft picks as compensation if the player leaves. The Cowboys can tender these players, and if another team comes in and signs them to an offer sheet, Dallas can either match that offer or let the player walk and collect the draft pick compensation. And this is where guys like Brock Hoffman and TJ Bass come into play. Now, I know a lot of Cowboys fans love both of these guys, and I get it because they have shown flashes when given opportunities, but here is the reality of the situation. The starting 5 on the offensive line is essentially set, and these guys are never going to crack that starting lineup barring injuries. You have depth pieces like Asim Richards, the rookie they drafted out of Oregon last year. You have Nate Thomas. You have veterans like Dakari Denijus, and you are looking at 10 to 12 offensive linemen on this roster, even without Hoffman and Bass. So at some point, you have to ask yourself, what is more valuable, having these guys buried on your depth chart or getting draft picks that can help you address actual needs? And I know some people are going to say, but what about depth? What if someone gets hurt? And that is a fair concern, but offensive line is historically one of the positions where players stay the healthiest, and you cannot not build your entire roster strategy around the fear that everyone might get injured, because if that happens, you have bigger problems than depth chart decisions. The Cowboys should absolutely tender both Hoffman and Bass at the appropriate levels and see if any team comes calling, because even if the draft pick compensation ends up being a later round selection, you can package multiple later picks together to move up in the draft and address that massive gap between pick 20 and pick 114. But here's where things get really interesting, because the changes go way beyond just the offensive line depth pieces, and we need to talk about what is happening in the defensive backfield. With an entirely new defensive back coaching group coming in, I would not be surprised at all if Dallas completely resets that room and brings in players that fit exactly what the new staff wants to do schematically. One name that immediately comes to mind is Jordan Lewis. And look, I think Lewis is a solid player who has done good things for this team. But with everything changing on that side of the ball, the winds seem to be blowing in a direction that suggests he might not be back next season. If he does return, that would be cool. But based on everything we are seeing right now with the coaching overhaul, I would be somewhat surprised. And this is not a knock on Lewis as a player. It is just the reality of what happens when you bring in an entirely new defensive staff that wants to build things their way. Now, let me tell you about a guy who should absolutely be on high trade alert, and that is Logan Wilson, the linebacker Dallas traded for last season in an attempt to help a struggling defense. And he was brought in with expectations that he would make an immediate impact, but he was severely underutilized and never really got a chance to show what he could do in that system. Here is the thing about Wilson that makes him an interesting trade candidate. His cap number is getting up there close to double digits when you factor in everything, and he is one of the guys on this roster who still has legitimate value around the league. Could you get a fifth round pick for him, maybe even a fourth? It is definitely possible. But here is the question you have to ask with the Cowboys transitioning to a 3-4 defense and with the guys they already have on the roster, plus the likelihood that they sign at least one outside linebacker in free agency, and the very real possibility they draft a linebacker with one of their first round picks. How much playing time is Logan Wilson actually going to get? And can you justify keeping him on your roster, taking up that cap space while he sits there not starting and not getting the most out of his abilities? And for me, the answer is no, you cannot justify that, which is why I think Wilson is absolutely a prime trade candidate this offseason, not because of anything he did wrong, but simply because the roster construction is moving in a different direction. But wait, there is more, because we have not even talked about the receiver room yet. And this is where things get complicated, because Jonathan Mingo is someone I actually really like as a prospect. He has the prototypical body at 6'2", 220 with legitimate speed in the 4.4 range, and that big frame gives him an enormous catch radius. But here is what nobody is talking about with the emergence of Ryan Flournoy and the additions of guys like Tristan Jackson, plus the expected arrival of George Pickens, and you already have CeeDee Lamb and Kevontae Turpin, who they have made clear they want to use more as a receiver. Where exactly does Jonathan Mingo fit? It is the same situation Jalen Tolbert found himself in, where there just is not enough room on the roster for everyone to get meaningful snaps. So do you just let a good young asset waste away on your bench, or do you try to maximize his value while other teams still see potential there? I would be calling every team in the league that needs receiver help and saying, hey, we have a 25-year-old with all the physical tools you could want. Give me a third-round pick, or at the very least a fourth, and let him come develop in your system, because he is never going to get the opportunities he needs here in Dallas. And speaking of crowded rooms, we need to discuss the linebacker situation beyond just Logan Wilson, because Maris Lufau is another guy whose future with the team is uncertain, and the math is pretty simple here. You have Shaq Leonard, you have DeMarvion Overshone, you have Logan Wilson, you have Lufau, you have all these different linebackers, and if Dallas signs someone in free agency, which they almost certainly will, and drafts another linebacker, which is very possible, where does Lufau fit into all of this? Now, to be fair, Lufau has shown some real value as a special teams ace, making big plays and showing the ability to create turnovers, but if the new coaching staff does not have a clear plan for how to use him in their scheme, then you have to consider moving him and getting assets back. The beautiful thing about Lufau is he is young at 25 years old, and he has demonstrated the ability to force turnovers at the NFL level, which is an incredibly valuable skill. So I think you could realistically get a third-round pick for him from a team that wants to take a shot on a young linebacker with upside. Every single one of these potential moves comes back to the same core principle. You have a brand new coaching staff on defense, and that staff needs to have all the tools necessary to build the defense in the vision and image that they want. And sometimes that means moving on from players who might be talented but just do not fit what you are trying to do schematically. And I saved one more name for last because this one might be the most interesting of all, and that is Luke Schoonmaker, the tight end Dallas selected in the second round of the 2023 draft. Look, the Cowboys just paid Jake Ferguson, and they have Brevin Spann-Ford also on the roster. So you have to start asking yourself some hard questions about Schoonmaker's future in Dallas. Can you really justify keeping a second-round pick tight end on your roster when he is giving you the type of production that Schoonmaker has provided so far, and when you have two other guys ahead of him who are clearly going to get the majority of the snaps? I am not saying Schoonmaker is a bad player, but this is about maximizing assets, and if you can get a fourth or fifth round pick for him from a team that will actually use him as a starter, that helps you more than having him buried on the depth chart. The bottom line here is that Dallas has a lot of decisions to make this offseason, and the gap in their draft board between pick 20 and pick 114 means they need to find creative ways to acquire more selections, whether that is through tendering restricted free agents and letting other teams sign them away for compensation, or actively seeking trades for some of the players I just mentioned. The Cowboys have options, and a smart front office will explore every single one of them. And honestly, I would rather see these young players go somewhere they can actually contribute and develop while Dallas gets draft capital in return than watch them waste away on a depth chart with no path to playing time. Now, I want to know what you think about all of this, because these are real decisions that could shape the future of this franchise. So drop a comment below and tell me, which of these players do you think Dallas should absolutely move, and which ones would you fight to keep? Also, if you are not subscribed yet, what are you even doing? Because we break down every Cowboys move the second it happens, and you do not want to be the last one to find out what this team is planning. This offseason is going to be absolutely wild, and I genuinely believe the Cowboys are headed in the right direction, despite what some of these national media analysts want you to think. Because when you see terrible trade proposals like sending Kenny Clark away for a 7th-round pick swap, you know that people are either clueless about what Dallas is actually building, or they are actively hoping the team fails, and neither of those things should discourage you as a Cowboys fan. The franchise is making bold moves, bringing in new voices on the coaching staff and building something that could be special. And yes, there will be some tough decisions along the way, including potentially moving on from players that fans have grown attached to. But that is how you build a championship contender. You make the hard choices when they need to be made, and you trust the process. I will see you in the next one, and make sure you let me know in the comments which potential trade has you the most excited or the most nervous, because this offseason is just getting started and there is so much more to come.